One day, out of morbid curiosity, I opened an email, a newsletter sent from the Hare Krishna organization. It was spam. In it, Lord Krishna was depicted in what was to me such a pathetic monotheistic manner, similar to a plastic Jesus among shopping mall born-again Christians, that I found it very demeaning. And I dashed off an email to this newsletter, accusing them of demeaning Lord Krishna. Now, this was very strange to the editor, because I'm sure that 99.9% of the letters that he gets in this regard would be criticizing the supreme position that they put Krishna in. And here I was accusing them of insulting him. I accused them of being Orientalists. I told them that they were superimposing Western culture, Christian culture, upon this ancient tradition. Well, the editor, he sent me back 3 pages of beautiful, beautiful poetry from the Srimad Bhagavatam, in which it justified what he did. And I appreciated those lines, that poetry, and I thanked him for it, but I had a question for him. What I wanted to know is where the authority for knowledge lay. Did it lie in the ink on the printed page, or did it lie in the voice of his guru? Well, he correctly explained to me that, in fact, it's the guru that interprets Scripture so that we can understand it. But I asked him, I said, just suppose for a minute that the guru and the Scripture disagreed on some point. Where would the authority for knowledge lie? In the Scripture, or in the speaking of the guru, from the tongue of the guru? Well, I admit that I shamelessly set him up, for he answered Scripture. The monotheist religions require a central doctrine and a central text, which is the basis for that doctrine, and that's why they've been called the religions of the book. The book was originally manuscripts and eventually printed texts. Their authority lies within the book. When the colonizers of the 18th and 19th centuries and their scribes in the human sciences wanted to map Indian thinking, they had the daunting task of defining indigenous Indian religion in such a way where it could fit all the categories laid out for it and put it on the grid of all things that, of course, we here in Europe maintained. They had to construct, as it were, an Indian religion that didn't exist as such, and so that it would also have a central definitive doctrine and a central text, a printed text. The printed text has been indispensable to knowledge in our modern world until the advent of the video screen and internet. We have critical editions of Indian texts, which means that scholars have compared various manuscripts and they've looked for obvious errors, and they've looked to date the manuscripts so that they could find the original. And these original manuscripts were originally made by somebody who listened to something being recited by a member of the oral tradition, and then they wrote it down. And of course, when the word got out that Europeans were looking for manuscripts in India, then manuscripts showed up by the truckload. One of the most famous of them was a text called the Ezor Vedam, which was a fraudulent text that was produced by the Jesuits in the French colony of Pondicherry to demonstrate the inferiority of the idolatrous Indians to Christianity. Voltaire, of all people, God bless his soul, used this text, believing in its authenticity, to demonstrate the subtlety and superiority of Indian thought to a decadent Christianity. So you have a yogi in the oral tradition who is reading the book of the world and commenting on it, making the songs, doing this daily, and somebody comes along and writes all this down. And then his words, the commentator of the book of the world, the yogi, his words are separated off from his mouth and from his body, and this becomes the manuscript. It's as if a snapshot in the day of the life of the oral tradition. I'm reminded by that very famous painting of Magritte, in which there he paints a large pipe, and then on the canvas he writes, "Ceci n'est pas une pipe." This is not a pipe. Well, can you smoke it? The words require a voice, and that particular voice of authority in the oral tradition provides the context and the exegesis, the interpretation. Once removed from its source, the text may now take on a life of its own. Interpretations may be read into it. It may be edited, updated, translated. The words may undergo some sort of transformation according to the needs of the academy, not the tradition itself. And the words are forbidden from leaving their pages. They are imprisoned by the front and end covers of the book. Gutenberg and his printing press started the modern process of taming the wild profusion of knowledge, civilizing vast, overgrown tracts of wilderness. Knowledge started migrating into the printed page, where it could be safe, where it could be safely displayed like the wild animals in a zoo. The more it migrated, the more it became information, and the more it lost its context. But in the process, it gained a much larger audience than that which could be maintained by the power of the voice alone, within the reach of the voice, and as such, it usurped the authority of that voice. Books demand literacy, which was rare when they first started showing their covers. A modern education, culture, discursive reasoning were necessary if they were to be useful, even if one could find access to books themselves. After all, in those days, Amazon was a big woman. But most important of all, the culture of literacy demanded a change in the way language was used. Language and the world became disconnected. Language began to express man's ideas about the world rather than being an articulation of the world itself. A new mapping process began. Words got lost. They no longer marked anything and were condemned to live only on the pages of books from which they were borrowed to colonize people's speech.